Okay, so thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Alex. My name is Sebastian Grant, and today I'm going to be presenting Legacy, the role of jewelry making in building African-American communities, preserving their heritage, and pushing creativity. So oftentimes when looking at jewelry scholarship and jewelry research, we have not recently have acknowledged as much the important contributions of African-American jewelry designers and artists who made some big contributions throughout the 20th century. So I wanted to take on this project with the help of the Jewelry Library and look into who were some of these names who had a presence throughout the 20th century in jewelry making and in jewelry history, and see who are those names and present them in this talk. And what I was looking for in looking for names and works from these overlooked African-American artists, what I found were stories and tales about heritage, tradition, and the importance of exploring different ways to use creativity in order to keep a culture alive. Each of these artists worked tirelessly on their work, from developing a full career to just working to make ends meet. And what they left behind then opened the door for many other artists to build on their legacy. So when looking at this conversation, there are a few questions I want to consider about the role of legacy in Black jewelry making. First of all, figuring out who were the African-American jewelry makers of the 20th century who may have been overlooked in mainstream jewelry history, and what were their stories that were left behind in the jewelry that they made, that physical legacy that is left behind. Who are then the jewelry designers who are still keeping those stories alive today in their own jewelry practice? And how have these jewelry designers connected with their past, especially a past that has been taken over by very many negative actions that have been a part of the Black community, and ones that they're still facing today and trying to deal with the pain and the struggle that has hit African-American communities ever since the beginning of American history. And then how can we go and uncover the legacy then of African-American jewelry making itself? Now, getting into this conversation, there are a few points I want to review. Just the fact that this is the beginning of a few months long project. So it's not going to be a comprehensive discussion of all the Black jewelry makers that were involved in the scenes throughout the 20th century. It's going to be much more of a short introduction to Black jewelry making that will continue to need more and more research the further we take these steps into the realms of research. And it's offering a non-comprehensive list of artists and designers. These are some very notable designers, but it does not speak for all artists or jewelers who were participating in these scenes. And it's going to feature a various collection of artists, jewelry makers, fashion designers, and more. So it's important to address that these are going to be lots of people that were not only working in jewelry making, but also were involved in a lot of other arts or fashion works as well, including those who went and worked specifically in jewelry. Now, also, when trying to talk about such a big and complicated topic as trying to define and identify the different themes in Black jewelry, there were a few observed themes that I went and found. But again, these do not go and speak for everyone who works in Black jewelry, but some different ideas that really come about, including the importance of artistic scenes and communities, where oftentimes many of these artists and designers would work together through various different mediums in creating jewelry. There's so much of an importance of collaboration and teaching that is involved with the presence of jewelry making, and also this importance of conversation and education, especially at the time when it is such a privilege to have been educated at this moment. And it's these communities that developed in many different cities, such as New York, Los Angeles, scenes that arrived in Baltimore and Chicago, and many that are still present today. In addition, there's another theme of explorations of African tradition, sometimes reaching back to that tradition in order to create works, and also seeing the importance of Afro-American tradition, African pride, as well, that is combined with modern ideas and modern techniques to go and create new works that are stunning in their own ways. We also see, again, the different disciplines in creativity in jewelry making. Jewelry is only a part of a multidisciplinary nature of creativity, oftentimes seen amongst African American artists who are involved in many different types of arts and crafts, and do not see these type of blurs between fine art and decorative arts, something that was established in much more Eurocentric communities. Instead, really taking time of doing jewelry as well as other sculpture and ceramics and many other crafts that we will see as well. And just as much, some of the two major styles of jewelry I went and saw was jewelry as aesthetic style and jewelry as political statements, which is oftentimes a very blurred difference, especially when reaching back towards African tradition as well. And jewelry really becomes this type of toolbox of expression of Black identity and Black community, really bringing their practice and their identities into their work. Now, the first works I would like to look at are coming from the earlier periods of modern jewelry, around between the 30s to the 60s, what I'm calling the pre-civil rights movement groups. And these are, of course, dates that aren't relative or comprehensive of all artists' major works, but give us just an idea of the artists around that time. And some of the themes I can try to encapsulate as well are the themes such as stylistic designer-based works that are based on combining modern arts techniques and modernist styles with African-American heritage. Of course, we also have to acknowledge the influence of creative movements in Black art that are coming around this time, especially from the Harlem Renaissance. And really seeing the rise, one of the first major periods of Black creativity that is much more widely acknowledged in a more international sphere. In addition, we also are seeing the rise of Black artistic creative projects really coming with help for opportunities coming from the Works Projects Progress Administration. Sorry for the typo that's there. But during the Great Depression, of course, the WPA, along with the Federal Art Project, was able to operate, giving jobs to artists and designers, usually without discrimination, which helped employ a lot more Black artists. And we also see the establishment of more than 100 community arts centers around the country, even some that were at the time given or termed for quote unquote Negroes. And this gives us important community centers such as the Harlem and Brooklyn Community Arts Center, picture I have here, and the Southside Community Arts Center in Chicago, and many others, and helped start the artistic careers of important Black artists, including Jacob Lawrence, Selma Burke, and also jewelry artists such as Curtis Tan, who went and helped with teaching along with the WPA. In addition, we also see the beginnings of jewelry being situated as a business practice that could be a successful business practice, along with the importance of the creativity behind it, and jewelry that oftentimes was exploring different techniques and mediums through the process of experimentation and exploration. Now, one other important point I would like to make as well, identified with Afro-American jewelry making, is the importance that education plays as a role in creating Black artists and really spurring the creativity of Black artists and jewelers. Education is playing such an important role of that passing of tradition and heritage from one generation to the next. And especially this is during a time where discrimination went and prevented lots of Black artists and members of the Black community to gain that education through the Jim Crow laws and other different aspects that really blocked education to really be achieved. So this became then a type of tool of power to really find any type of success in life if you manage to find a way to become educated. And with the help of the WPA and the rise of these community centers, historically Black colleges and universities and so on, this led to different institutions that could provide education for the Black community, which was just so important. And I have a picture here of the Cameo House in Cleveland, Ohio, which was one of these centers of theater that was important in promoting arts through theater, but also then through creativity and jewelry making. And these community and cultural centers became places where jewelry designers could really learn more and get the necessary education that they need. From makers such as Billie Oliver, who went and developed her education in different community centers, to even help starting the jewelry career of Phyllis Baldwin when she started taking classes at the 92nd Street Y. And just as important as it is learning and gaining that education to work in these creative mediums, just as much was it important to find educators, especially models, who could represent the youth that were studying from them. And we see many of these artists really taking a role in educating and bringing on the next generations of makers, including Art Smith, who was teaching at Haystack in the 70s, Curtis Tan with his help of creating the Watts Arts Center, Gracie Johnson in Baltimore, creating her boutique with beadworking practices and classes, and Dale Davis, who is teaching at Dorsey High School, along with being in charge of his gallery. And this education was really important then in establishing community and really having artists to come together and collaborate on shows, works, exhibitions, and to create artistic works together, among them being jewelry. Now, let's go ahead and talk about then the artists who represented the early parts of these movements, starting off with Winifred Mason, who is one of the earliest known Black jewelers to create a successful business out of her work. It all really started with her creating a copper and silver pendant in 1940 for personal use. And when she went and showed it out to the community, all of a sudden she had other people who were interested as well, wanted to get involved and wanted their own pieces, and she started producing more and more of them. And this soon turned into a business where she began by opening a shop in her home and then moved down to Greenwich Village, where she became a part of the mid-century Greenwich Village jewelry scene. She went and opened up a shop on 133rd West 3rd Street and really began then creating a lot of these one-of-a-kind pieces that were meant to be artistically centered, really fit to specifications of her clients, and really went and were embracing that type of modernist sense of creativity that was taken in hand. And in 1945, she then went and won the Rosenwald Fellowship, which allowed her to then travel and study different design techniques. And this is where we see then this exploration of African tradition really playing a role when Winifred Mason herself goes to Haiti and looks at her West Indian upbringing or heritage as a way of looking at the important rituals and styles of Haitian artistic craft, especially Haitian voodoo ritual, which she ends up incorporating into her own designs. And we can see an example here of a silver earring that is using the voodoo veve design, really being incorporated into the creativity of her work and really signifying her work after the fellowship. And Winnie herself went and managed to get a good buzz around this business, so much so that 6 years after she made her first piece, she managed to land the cover of Ebony magazine wearing her own copper jewelry, and also went and had some successful clients as well, including Billie Holiday, who is pictured here wearing one of her necklaces, and I believe earrings as well. But in addition to building this successful business, the education was also important to Winnie as well, as she went and had an interracial staff who would participate in her work and develop their own ideas as well about how to create their own pieces. And other Black artists such as Pericles Baptiste and most famously Art Smith went and were able to collaborate with her and on her works and develop their own ideas as well. And eventually, Winifred Mason herself went and moved to Haiti, where she continued her business there with her husband. But Art Smith was able to take the mantle in the Greenwich Village scene and is our next artist that I would like to discuss. Now, Art Smith actually met Winnie Mason during his time he was still studying at Cooper Union. And Art was working in Harlem with the Junior Achievement Program at the Children's Aid Society. And this was also where he started learning about jewelry really being an art form, something that you can work with and be really creative and use it to go and explore different techniques. Art then just went and worked for Winnie Mason and was very influenced by some of her techniques in metalworking, which really went and helped influence the much more modernist styles of his own work. And Art is very much known for that type of biomorphic abstracted designs that are most famously shown on his modernette cuff bracelet. But he was also interested in the influences of African jewelry, oftentimes going to the public library to look into African and Nubian jewelry styles in books and incorporating them into his work. Now, Art was a prominent figure in the modernist studio jewelry movement in the mid-century, and this is what helped him find much more success in the jewelry business. But even with this success, he still had hardships that he had to face, especially the hardship of his store, his first store being vandalized and having to deal with his identity as a Black and gay man amongst a time where racial hatred was still very prominent. And because of the vandalism of his shop, he had to actually move to another part of Greenwich Village where he went and was able to continue his shop. But he still managed to continue to become one of the most famous Black American jewelry designers, mainly through recent museum retrospectives of his work, especially at the Brooklyn Museum. But he also really showed himself as a great example of a model who could make it in jewelry, a representative of someone who is a Black man working in the jewelry business, but someone who found success in it. And he continued to go and play that role of education again by educating later generations and coming to schools such as Haystack Mountain School of Crafts in order to, at the time when it was a call for Black representation of teachers in jewelry design, he was able to go and be one of those representatives. Now, at the same time on the East Coast, in my research, I also went and found a couple of artists that I would like to show who were more independent, working at the same time period, but at the same time also really promoting the importance of gaining that education in all different types of work and craft in order to create their pieces. And this is where I start with someone like Billie Oliver, who worked in various mediums, including painting, silversmithing, enamel, batik, all while studying at community centers, and studied painting and sculpture under important Harlem Renaissance artists such as Henry Bonarin and Charles Alston, studying enameling under Eugene Grimsby. And she was a member of the Westchester Art Society and the American Craftsman Council, and mainly created her career around the creation of ceramic jewelry, which started first as a hobby at home, but with the creation of more of these ceramic pieces and the promotion of her work, it soon became so popular that she needed a factory on Long Island, which employed 25 people to continue making these pieces. In addition to her ceramic work, she also designed for fashion shows and created pieces that once again show that influence of African art and tradition in a very prideful way, creating pieces such as these earrings, which resemble African ceremonial masks and are able to take on a new aesthetic to the process. And Billie was really involved with the community as well in Harlem and New York, and was friends with Winnie Mason, but also was friends with painters Romare Bearden and Jacob Lawrence. And once again, really helped with the process of educating others on jewelry by offering her own jewelry advice in newspaper columns, especially working as a reporter for the Amsterdam newspaper, and helping spread her knowledge then of jewelry. Another independent jeweler I'd like to discuss, who mainly worked in the scenes of Philadelphia and then New Haven, Connecticut, was Constance Ramsey, who focused on creating artistic, non-commercial pieces that were meant to be one of a kind. Again, looking towards the artistic nature of exploring these pieces. She mainly worked in silver and brass to form cuffs, chokers, pendants, and used either sheet metal or developed wax models that would then be turned into sculptural pieces. And while mostly working independently, she did also take the time to take classes with the Connecticut Society of Craftsmen, again, trying to gain that education to push even further into her creative output. And eventually she then moved into charcoal and oil painting, selling her tools, but we can still see the memory of her work in jewelry through pieces such as these two silver pendants that I have pictured here. One other East Coast jewelry artist and sculptor that I would like to discuss is Charles Edgar Patience, who someone who is really important for the fact of being part of a family tradition of his line of business, especially working in an experimental medium of anthracite coal and sculpting this coal into different types of objects. Now, his father was Harry Brazier Price, Harry Brazier Patience, who was actually the son of a runaway slave from the South who went and moved to Pennsylvania during the Civil War. And Harry Patience ended up working in a coal mine for a living as a breaker boy. And often during the times he would relax, he would take coal and whittle with it, carving them into different objects. Originally carving hearts, crosses, and charms, he eventually then started a business of making carved coal souvenirs. Harry then managed to go and teach this practice to his 6 kids, and C. Edgar Patience then took over the business, first in partnership with his brother Harold, and then on his own, and expanded from working with these souvenirs to turning it into an art form of sculpture in coal. And we can see as well, I have not only the piece itself made out of the coal, but also a printing plate that showed the type of carving designs that would have been done out of this coal material. Now, eventually, Charles Edgar Patience was able to expand his business and gain success in his career, carving sculptural works for companies such as Mack Trucks, sculpting the official seal for Barbados out of coal, and creating pieces for US presidents, also including presidents such as Lyndon B. Johnson, who went and had a clock and bookends made from Patience coal right inside the White House. Now, Patience himself eventually died in 1972, unfortunately of black lung from his work in coal, but the story of his legacy is still being kept and pushed even further today by his daughter, Juanita Patience Moss, who has been writing and keeping information about his work and promoting it. Now, looking at the West Coast of important artists and designers that played a role in the early development of jewelry practices, we can also look to some of the more famous and artists, especially most famous Black artists, coming from contemporary art scenes that we see today, including Betty Saar, who's really renowned for her works in assemblages, but also went and had a background in making jewelry. Some of the images we were able to see from her jewelry include pieces made from leather that she created from her Mojo series back in the 1970s. And it was using cow hides and leather that were given to her by Alonzo Davis, who was one of the co-founders of Brockman Galleries. And she wanted to use these pieces and base her ideas off of Native American fetish objects, which pushed her away from using more Eurocentric objects that she was using previously in her earlier work. Now, she also went and continued to make jewelry earlier in her career in the 50s, which was one of her first creative outputs that she was involved in. And she collaborated with enamel artist Curtis Tan to make the company Brown & Tan in the early 50s. Betty's maiden name was Betty Brown, his was Curtis Tan, and it became this funny title to go and put them together. With this collaboration, Tan was actually able to help introduce Betty into the scene in Los Angeles. And they would both then work in enamel on copper, creating different pieces with this enamel that would incorporate plates, jewelry, and so on before Betty decided to then move further into printing and to fine art. But Betty does acknowledge the fact that Curtis Tan was really an important figure that really helped her get into a much more into those artist circles that helped go and develop and push her career even further. Now, looking into Curtis Tan himself, this is a very important figure in the jewelry scene. One who, once again, worked in many different artistic techniques. And he went and started his artistic career at school, as I mentioned previously, working and teaching on behalf of the WPA, but not accepting a scholarship himself in the arts. And he also went and had, excuse me, had a moment of also working with the Caramu House and being involved in his earlier in his career in theater, even participating in plays by important writers such as Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston, really getting involved with the Gilpin Players. But then after serving in World War II and pausing his work, he started getting back into some of the multiple artistic styles he developed, including enamel, working with the Limoges technique, to tie-dye, and then also to the work in batik. Often at the forefront of in these methods and teaching classes to others when they became popular trends, such as enamel work and tie-dye. And he then moved to LA after being in Ohio to help start some of the earliest Black artistic scenes in the South California region. And I have a piece of his batik here that is called Backbone, which is a tribute and honor to his mother. And it's important to go and remember how much his mother played an important role in pushing Curtis to the career that he decided to have, especially when we think of this one story where his mother sending him a box of old things to his place in LA. He looks in the box and sees a piece of enamel that he did from a much earlier period of time before leaving his work, and then decided to go back and get involved with enamel work, and which really became a primary part of his career. Studying under Thomas Usher and learning enamel that would then push him to use this enamel work, especially in his work as the director, creative director for Matisse, the company that was on behalf of Renoir. Now, including the artistic creations he would get involved in, we can see pieces such as these palette pins that are very colorful in style to much more geometric bracelets. We can also see the use of these the copper that's really imprinted here as well, really in harmony with the extremely colorful enamel works as well. Now, in addition to working with enamel at Matisse Renoir, he also was really part of these important scenes, starting some of the earliest artistic groups in Los Angeles, including the 11 Artists Associated, and was part of mingling with big artists such as Charles White and John Outerbridge. Now, Curtis continued to work in jewelry with Renoir and Matisse, and also went and worked on behalf of Chasseur-Barastoff. And then moved on into working in enamel on copper outside of the Renoir Matisse brand, eventually working for the company Sigeret, which created these very fascinating type of bird styles, as we can see both independent and on a plate designed by Curtis. But again, in addition to the work that he did in design, it's important to also acknowledge the work that he had in education, becoming a founder of the Watts Tower Arts Center and serving as their director from 1967 to 73. he really emphasized the importance of teaching in these programs and played a major role then in teaching and education throughout Pasadena and Watts, not only working with the Watts Tower Arts Center, but also teaching classes for special education and really promoting artistic creativity as a means of creating new methods for members of the Black community to really get involved in the world of art and design. Now, another important artist, designer, and curator that plays a pivotal role in the South California scene is Evangeline Montgomery, also known as EJ. And she also worked in jewelry under Thomas Usher, who I mentioned previously taught enamel to Curtis Tan, and played a major role in also getting much more museological representation of Black artists in the art world, constantly promoting artists of color through the United States Information Agency, through the State Department, but also had a creative career herself, training in metalsmithing, ceramics, fiber, photography, printmaking, drawing, and painting. And she would work with silver lost wax techniques and create sculptures such as these ancestral boxes, which were influenced by her stay in Nigeria and were meant to evoke memory and social consciousness of the ancestors inside them. For instance, this one symbolizing Marcus Garvey, and relating it to African traditions of ritual and reliquary put in an artistic context. In addition, she also then created jewelry really using these casted silver techniques that really show these very abstract and biomorphic designs, and once again are being done as a type of blurring between art and jewelry, and this blurring between crafts and fine arts in these truly new creative styles and methods. But one other major important role that Montgomery went and played in her work was again in her curating. And she was important for having one of the first major exhibitions of Black crafts workers. And this was the California Black Craftsman show in 1970 at Oakland Mills College Museum, where she was working at the museum as a consultant in the museum's Cultural and Ethnic Affairs Guild. And this featured some of the many important and influential Black designers, which are now much more being recognized for their talents. And among them, very many important jewelers, including Renita Henderson, William Maxwell, Carol Ward, which is very fascinating. Carol Ward now works as a politician, as the director of the San Francisco BART, or the Transport Authority there, and Bob Jefferson. But in addition, she also, in this show, featured the works of Dale B. Davis, who played a very pivotal role himself in promoting African-American art in the 60s and 70s, owning Brockman Gallery in Los Angeles, which featured many artists such as Charles White, Betty Saar, John Outerbridge, Bill Padrón, Romare Bearden, Jacob Lawrence, amongst many others. And he, with his brother Alonzo, went and started this gallery and really then played this influential role in the promotion of those arts. Brockman also then gave back to the community through federal training programs from the gallery, especially for low-income students and employees in public arts programs. And although he was mainly working in assemblage, he also went and created jewelry, including these medallion brooches that I show here, which have these very abstract shapes, one of a pyramid and the other of a face, amongst this very heavy medallion. And one other important designer that was featured in the show was Doyle Lane, who's also, again, part of this community, being a friend of Curtis Tan and Charles White. He primarily worked in ceramics, but also went and designed jewelry, and was most famous for creating his weed pots, which were these very small but heavily rounded, very spherical type of vessels out of ceramics, but turn those same ceramics into beadwork and in jewelry, where we can see that type of the same nice, rounded, very smooth creation of these beads placed within a jewelry context and a jewelry setting. Now, looking at the works from Montgomery and the much more political bent and exploration in African American identity, this is where I start looking at then Black jewelry after the Civil Rights period, where the Civil Rights movement itself really became more of a call for more Black representation in the arts, and developed, of course, the rise of Black pride as an aesthetic with Black is Beautiful movements. And we see a more mainstream presence of Black designers in fashion and performance that get renowned names during the time period that they're working in, but now are only having this idea of being rediscovered, so-called. We also see the influence of the Black Power movement, really creating these new artistic circles and communities, and more jewelry pieces that are making more explicit political statements of Black history, really looking at that connection between Black history and Black pride, and looking at one's roots situated in African history. And looking first in the realms of fashion and performance, we really start seeing the beginning of Black designers featuring their works in fashion magazines and performance pieces all the way back from the 60s, but gaining some more prominence in the 70s and to the 80s, seeing fashion designers who would be making jewelry on the side. And this leads me to one of the most prominent of the 70s, Bill Smith, who was born in 1936 in Madison, Indiana, and was encouraged by his family to pursue the arts in both dance and eventually in jewelry making. And he graduated from Indiana University, studying metalsmithing under the metalsmith Alma Eicherman. And when he moved to New York, officially tried pursuing a career in dance in 1954, before he then started working on jewelry during the day. And this ended up having him pursue it full-time by 1958. And his first major company was him working with the actor Raymond St. Jacques, who was famous in the 60s as Simon Blake from Rawhide. And they worked together in jewelry, creating these very bold metalsmith pieces, including this choker we see here, and a finger ring that were featured in Harper's Bazaar. But in addition, was a company that gained such prominence amongst fashion magazines that it was eventually had Smith St. Jacques pieces that were worn as well by Cher and by Twiggy, the bracelets that she has on her arm there, and really gaining a type of prominence that went even further when Bill Smith then decided to join Richelieu, the costume jewelry company, around 1968. And by joining Richelieu, he was able to go and create these very bold pieces that have this style with them, including this elongated pearl necklace that is dripping right down her body and really just going and accentuating the body, and this geometric necklace that has this very spring-like type of action around the neck. And these managed to go and get Bill Smith a lot of fame, first getting him and the company Richelieu a Swarovski Award in 1969 as Designer of the Year, and becoming then the first Black designer to win a Coty Award in 1971. And this work, Bill Smith's work itself, was even exhibited in the Philadelphia Museum of Art and featured some of these even more, and his most famous bold pieces, his body ornaments, which were again these pearls that would go and cover the whole body and really accentuate the figure. And these were even shown on the Today Show with Barbara Walters, who went and had some of these pieces modeled on the television on NBC. Now, Bill Smith then went and also had his work in performance, also working with Cecil Beaton to go and create jewelry designs for Katharine Hepburn in the show Coco on Broadway in 1969. And really then continued to work past Richelieu, eventually creating work for Cartier, and even designing pieces for some of the famous Black models that are really popping up around this time, including Naomi Sims, who is pictured here in Look magazine, wearing a custom headpiece that was made by Bill Smith in 1971, along with a nice Cartier bangle. Now, In addition, Bill Smith also went and had a role of delivering jewelry and design lectures around the country in the 70s, but eventually ended his company in 1981 and moving on then to work for Omega Incorporated and Hattie Carnegie. But we can still see the importance of fashion and fashion design on jewelry making today, including the work of Yvette Monique, who has her work influenced by designers such as Alexander McQueen, Chanel, Givenchy, and Thierry Mugler, and also creates these extremely bold pieces using the medium of aluminum wire to take this snake necklace that broke and recreate it in a new way, capturing the story of Adam and Eve and the serpent, and playing with that aluminum wire to create this full breastplate. Another multi-talented artist that was working in the Philadelphia scene, especially in the realms of 80s style pop-based art and jewelry, was Von Stubbs, who went and graduated from the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in 1972 and worked in painting, sculpting, quilt making, and jewelry making, and had his work featured in many different institutions, including the Afro-American Cultural and Historical Museum in Philadelphia, the Stedelijk Museum in the Netherlands, the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, and being a part of the Helen Drutt collection. And his work was created using found objects, oftentimes stories of people saying he would even look around to see whatever objects he can find and put together, and having this 80s pop aesthetic of mixing kitsch with fine Eurocentric based art techniques in order to go and really question those differences between high art and low art, as we can see with this Wedgwood lady brooch, but also with this Disneyland brooch, once again using high 80s pop aesthetic into his work. And we also get this clearly in the work of Patrick Kelly, who is most famous for his work as a fashion designer in the 80s, but also had a part in jewelry making, especially creating the really grandiose and bold pins that we can see even here, the button on his shirt, that were really part of his aesthetic. Now, of course, his work in fashion really found fame within Paris, where he got magazine attention from Elle, and then attracted the interest of shops such as Bloomingdale's and Bergdorf Goodman, and was able to have important clients such as Naomi Campbell, Grace Jones, Madonna, Isabella Rossellini, and Princess Diana. He uses lots of this same symbolism that's usually attributed to his jewelry, to his fashion in his jewelry, including buttons, bows, and figures. And we really get this nice, then, big boldness of pieces and designs. Again, I feel like adopting that type of 80s aesthetic of being bold and beautiful, especially in these gorgeous hearts that are put together right along the body. But in addition to looking at fashion as a big pop statement, we also see him exploring fashion through the realms of dealing with the past of Black Americans and the issues of segregation and racism, and using those images to then make a subversion by using these negative images themselves, including ones such as this Blackamoor face that is shown here, or even the Blackamoor styled button that is a part of Patrick Kelly's logo. He's able to go and address these horrors of the past and try to use them as a way to subvert the narrative and take power back from the symbol. Now, it is interesting, though, to think about how fashion itself has been undergoing this issue of using blackface subjects in appropriated Eurocentric terms of spheres, where it has then gotten controversy just because of the lack of understanding, or even the lack of nature, even looking at the history and seeing how these symbols have created the type of issues around Black identity today. And this is what Patrick Kelly is really getting involved in, trying to take those symbols and revert them into a much more positive context while also acknowledging his past. And this very protest or political statement that Patrick Kelly makes in this piece really can be seen then in the Jewelry and Politics, which will be my last piece of discussion for our talk today. where the civil rights movement really then created much more of these conversations about Black pride and identity, which then led to much more explicit depictions of these identity politics within the jewelry, because jewelry was able to then be used as a vehicle to have some of the difficult conversations of Black American life, including slavery, the trauma of Black Jim Crow, and the workings of trying to find Black pride in the midst of it. And we have these early groups in the 70s that become part of this big political artistic groups, including Afrocobra, which was a big group in Chicago that created art exploring their roots back in Africa and creating a Black aesthetic of Black experience itself through the presence of art. In addition, they also took that idea of community and education in hand and put it into their philosophy of creating art that supported and promoted education in the community. And among some of those artists was Howard Mallory, who went and working in ceramic sculpture, also was able to create jewelry and create works which, as he said, wanted to create a much more positive force within the Black community. Now, unfortunately, we do not know very much about his jewelry work. This is something that needs a bit more research to get into, but it is a way to start seeing how even Afrocobra had presences of jewelry within the multidisciplinary works of many different artistic styles that were involved. In addition, I think it's also important to talk about the work of Carolee Prince, especially in her connection with the African Jazz Art Society and studio scene in Harlem, which was an early part of the Black is Beautiful Pride movement of the 1960s. Now, the AJASS was formed in 1956 by photographer Kwame Brathwaite and his brother Elombe Brath, as part of this post-Marcus Garvey movement that really focused on this idea of Black pride and really being true to Black identity without the influences of European-based culture on them. And in addition, they would often collect Black models found around Harlem and create what was known as their Grandassa models. These models were known to promote natural hairstyles, especially during a time when hairstyles were conformed to white standards of society, such as pressing or flattening or straightening one's hair. And they would have these shows and pageants that would show natural hairstyles, natural Black aesthetic, that were then a promotion of and a celebration of Black pride from an early time period starting in the around 62 to 63 and really gaining more prominence up to 1968. Now, Carolee also played then an important role of oftentimes contributing jewelry to Brathwaite's models, especially string beaded pieces, as we can see here depicted on Kwame's wife, Sikolo Brathwaite, who is wearing this type of beadwork that is, as we are going to see even further in our discussion, becomes a central point of African tradition in arts explored through the African American lens. And in addition to creating works for the Grandassa models, she also went and played a prominent role in creating headpieces for Nina Simone, especially for her work in concerts and her tours. Now, unfortunately, we will need to know even more about Carolee Prince. What was her work after the Grandassa models? But it's something that we'll continue to hopefully research and get more information. Now, another important artist coming from around the 80s is Corrine Simpson, who went and started her work importantly as a photographer of the 1980s, working for the Village Voice and Amsterdam News, capturing scenes of African-American cultural events, especially the nightlife in Harlem, but then went into jewelry design, especially when she started needing to make objects that she couldn't find in a jewelry store, and ended up creating a clientele based on wearing her own pieces, going to Paris, and while working on her photography work, having people really get interested in the work that she has and asking for pieces of their own. Now, one of her most famous works, though, is the Black Cameo collection, which started when she had a client who requested a cameo of a person of color. And Corrine went looking and trying to research and find any pieces showing members of color, she found out those cameos barely existed. And when they did exist, they only existed within racist blackamoor contexts. So Simpson then decided she wanted to design and create these cameos herself and show Black women in a prideful way that can be identified with anyone, any woman and person of color who wanted to have a positive identification with the pieces that they wanted to buy. And after getting licensed by Avon, it went and gained great success, including then had clients such as Debbie Allen, Nancy Wilson, and Denzel Washington's wife, Pauletta Pearson. Now, another important artist coming from the Baltimore scene and the Baltimore community of jewelry makers is Gracie Johnson, who also takes time to really explore the deep connections of Africa and African art in her work, oftentimes even going and visiting the continent and incorporating some of the materials she found there into her work, really showing this connection, very physical connection between Africa and her African American art, and explores one of the oldest jewelry traditions of beadwork, using it as a way to connect to the expression of one's spirit and their nature at her boutique, A Touch of Gracie. Now, in addition, she is also the co-founder of the Damali Bead Collective in Baltimore, which is again showing that importance of teaching and education amongst the community, where it's having different people come together in the community and work on these creative works of bead making and design and work, especially within her boutique and also then within the collective. And she is able then to go and show it in what I think are some very fabulous type of pieces here, where we see jewelry work that is both jewelry and also wall art, showing connections, these two silhouettes of a man and a woman, and using these, once again, beadworks and really these connections to African tradition, African culture, especially the use of cowrie shells around the man's head as well. And really then blurring again that question between so-called art and jewelry by having pieces where you can take them off the burlap and technically you can wear them over your head as its own jewelry piece itself. Now, one of the artists that I think makes one of the most explicit type of connections then with the past and especially some of the pain that is still felt today in the Black community is Phyllis Baldwin, who worked as a jewelry artist around till the 90s and is now currently retired. But in the work that she created, one of the most striking ones is this piece here, a pin that shows an image of the Middle Passage. Now, this image, of course, comes from a etching or pamphlet that comes from the 18th century, and it shows the transport of African slaves as they were captured off the places such as the Ivory Coast and were packed together in these tight boats where then they were moved from Africa to America, oftentimes many of them not surviving along the journey because of the cramped and very just sullied conditions that were involved with these early horrors of slavery. And when Phyllis was researching this work, she continued to see this Middle Passage picture over and over again. And because of the pain that she felt with it and the way that it hurt her so much, she decided she wanted to then use it as an emotional piece, as a way of trying to have a catharsis of working with the pain that comes from Black communities and the past that they've had to deal with. And she then creates this work and includes as well around 5 heads that are stuck to nooses, also showing that the Black pain does not only connect with slavery, but also then connects with the history of lynching as well, that was a big part of the Jim Crow era. And Phyllis does this as a piece really with artistic control. Only had around 6 made, and some of them were able to be donated to places such as the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum. But they really are then a part of these jewelry pieces that make explicit discussions of the past in their work. And this can also be seen in a poster which goes and explains the work as much as it shows the aesthetic nature of it as well. And this leads me to the work of Clyde Johnson, who also comes from the Baltimore scene, the Baltimore community, who also makes this explicit discussion of Black identity and the past that it has to deal with. Originally wanting to be a mortician, Clyde has a great fascination with the body and how it's presented and how it's portrayed. And he decided to take this, again, looking at the pain of the past and explore it in the era of lynching in the Jim Crow era as a way of trying to go and depict these bodies that were lynched and show them as a sign of respect. And he takes this even further into then creating wearable art pieces made from this electroformed copper that were shown in a performance fashion show in 2013 known as A Tree Remembers, where he has these branches that are featured magnolia trees that really then are connected with the pieces themselves that show heads and different bodies and are showing these Black men who would have been hung and who would have been horribly tortured in the most heinous of ways. And this is Clyde then trying to find a way to give a respect to those bodies, a way to try and give them some rest through exploring it within his medium. And this, of course, then leads me to one of the most prominent artists who really takes this conversation to hand, and that is, of course, the work of Joyce Scott, who I believe is one of the most successful in combining these social, cultural, and political statements in art and jewelry in both humorous and political ways. And Joyce often makes her work using beadwork such as peyote stitching in order to go and create pieces that really make people think and really want them to try and understand what the piece is saying, especially when it's exploring issues such as racism, sexism, the female body and what it means to be a woman, or what it means to be someone who's Black, or what it means to be in this category or that category. And he puts it in a process, in a medium that is a style of full artistry, really going and blurring instances between jewelry and artwork. Or as she went and said to me when I interviewed her, telling me that there's no difference in making the cup versus painting the cup. And really seeing that design and art and all of them are really just one big collection and expression of creativity. And being true to her inner core, then she went and has this depicted in jewelry pieces and necklaces, some of them, again, exploring the horrific side of the past, including a necklace showing a lynching, similar to what I showed with Clyde's work, and can see that connection there once again in this Baltimore jewelry scene, but then also having these much more humorous works, including this peeping Tom, who seems to be just having an interesting time staring at this exposed body coming out from the waters. In addition, though, to working on her art, she also plays an important role in curating shows that commented from a much earlier period of time on the lack of diversity, especially within artistic exhibitions. This is very prominent in her show in 1999 called Stop Asking, We Exist, which was Joyce being tired of people asking her where to find Black artists and not really then putting the work themselves to try and actually find those artists themselves, even when they have been in the presence of art and design throughout the 20th century. So with creating this show then, it was a way of showing examples of Black artists and trying to then ask for more representation. And I cannot go and forget the importance of Joyce also being a mentor to the Baltimore community, working with always being willing to teach and inspire others in jewelry design, including some of the jewelers she went and mentioned to me, in Clyde and in Gracie and in Yvette, and even working and coming to them and showing her own beadwork styles in order to, again, really bring that teaching and that education towards another generation. And this is because Joyce herself went and had her own connection of a big important figure from the past, and that was, of course, when she met Art Smith at Haystack. So Joyce was taking a class there, jewelry class, and as the story she told me, When Art Smith was walking around as her teacher, looking at different pieces they were working on, she was working on found objects in enamel, and Art just goes and says to Joyce, "I don't know what you're doing, but please don't stop." And this, of course, went and created an important friendship between Art and Joyce. And this friendship that lasted throughout the 70s and 80s went and also then led to actual collaboration on works themselves, including the We Two piece that is currently shown at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. And this collaboration between Smith and Scott stands as an important example of the many relationships and friendships that have really been developed between Black artists and their communities, including an emphasis on the importance of teaching and really moving from giving that techniques from one generation to the next, where we see the fluid metallic art styles of Art Smith's work, also then with the important beadwork of Joyce Scott. And this then really, I think, stands as the most important for me in terms of just really signifying the importance of community, the importance of education, and the importance of working together in order to create and proceed to much more creative goals. And this then leads me to a legacy that's secure. To go and see what are then, where can we go from here and where can we take the next steps in our research? First of all, then, just knowing how much it is then important to understand our past in order to know our future. We cannot move forward in representing Black businesses and jewelry design without taking the time to acknowledge the ones who took the first steps to get us here. And it's important to note the idea of education as well, especially when education oftentimes wasn't able to be found by all Black artists and designers. During my conversations with many of these artists, there were many mentions of Black artists who simply did not know how to promote their work or apply for grants or had that lack of education to push themselves further, which then went and had a dent in their success. There's also that issue of this lack of Black teachers who were able to go and teach arts to students and have that role model that they can look towards to push them to new goals. And it is important to see that how little this research is here, and the fact that we need to push and continue working into more research and getting more information about these people, and to then use it to protect these stories, protect and honor the stories that are made here, and really take them to the next level of becoming an important part of mainstream jewelry culture. So I want to thank everyone. Thank you very much to Bella Naiman and Jewelry Week for featuring me. And I want to give a big thank you to all the people that I've reached out to, I was able to talk to, hear their stories, including Joyce Scott, Kwame Brathwaite, Robert's Projects, Martin Tan, Jean Tan, Andre Leon Talley, Taylor Oliver, George Siskel, Yvette Monique, Grace Johnson, Clyde Johnson, Paula Ramsey, Phyllis Baldwin, Helen Drutt, Burton Sargent, and Matthew Burkholtz. And I want to go and also let everyone know that Joyce will also be speaking later today at a Jewelry Week event tonight at 7 p.m. hosted by Arts Jewelry Forum and the Museum of Art and Design. So I hope to really see everyone there. And thank you so much.